On behalf of Glessner House and Friends of Historic Second Church, I would like to welcome you to today's symposium, Howard Van Doren Shaw at 150, celebrating Shaw's legacy on the occasion of the 150th anniversary of his birth, which was this past Tuesday. It's exciting to be able to bring together a variety of individuals who will be speaking to you today about the various aspects of Shaw's career, which you will see is, in fact, quite varied. And I would like to start out by thanking the two funders for today's symposium. First of all, the Donnelly Foundation, and secondly, the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation. The Donnelly Foundation will be funding a publication that will include all of today's papers that are being delivered, and we will be mailing those out to you. We hope to have them out sometime in the month of June, so watch your mail for that. And the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation is videotaping all of the presentations today, and they will be available on their YouTube channel. So I know you will want to watch these often, so you can watch them 24/7 anytime you would like. I would also like to give a special thanks to Paul Myers, who is here from Marktown today. I hope many of you had an opportunity to see his wonderful exhibit of Shaw artifacts in Fellowship Hall, which he graciously shared with us. If you did not, please make sure to see those during the breaks, as well as the copies he provided of Frances Shaw's recollections of her husband and information on Marktown. We have a number of special guests with us today, and I would ask anybody who is a current or former Shaw homeowner to please raise your hand. Very good. And descendants of Shaw owners as well. So yes, all right, very good. And we know we have people traveling from Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., so it's exciting to have everybody here together today. In your program, please make note of the fact that Friends of Historic Second Church will be sponsoring two Shaw walking tours in September, one in Marktown and one in the near north side of Chicago. Tickets are limited for both of these, so if you are interested, we encourage you to visit the Friends website and purchase your ticket soon. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. Since I am the first speaker, I'm not going to introduce myself. I'm going to go right into my presentation. So I thought a good way to start off this morning would be to give a brief overview of Shaw's life, and then to focus on his work in the surrounding South Loop neighborhood, which is actually a microcosm of his career. There's a little bit of everything that he did in the South Loop. And I'll start out with a quote from his wife that she wrote just after he died. Quote, "Howard Shaw never had a partner. He wished to do every detail himself. That trait was his undoing physically. He was impatient with anyone who did not do as well as himself, and he did everything well." So, Howard Van Doren Shaw was born on May 7th, 1869 in Chicago, in his parents' home, on the 2100 block of Calumet, which is just a few blocks away from where we are gathered this morning. And he was named after his maternal grandfather, William Howard Van Doren. His father was Theodore Andrews Shaw, a very successful wholesale dry goods merchant, and a descendant of John Shaw, a Quaker who accompanied William Penn to the colonies. His mother was Sarah Van Doren, whose lineage extended back to the first white child born on Long Island, as well as the first mayor of Brooklyn, so long American roots. After Shaw's death, his fellow architect, Alfred Granger, noted that Shaw had inherited his father's strength of character and quiet firmness, while receiving his artistic taste and his love for color and fantasy from his mother, who was a talented artist, as you'll see in this photograph. The Shaw House, which was at 2124 South Calumet Avenue, was in the midst of the most exclusive residential district in the city of Chicago. As such, Howard enjoyed a privileged upbringing and attended the Harvard School for Boys, which was nearby at 21st in Indiana. He went off to Yale University, where he received his BA in 1890, and then he headed off to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he completed the rigorous 2-year architectural program in just 1 year. During the summer of 1892, he traveled to Europe for an extended journey studying and sketching architecture, which he did on all of his travels. While he was in Spain, he had the opportunity to meet and travel for a few days with James Renwick Jr., who was 50 years his senior. Renwick was the architect of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City and this building for Second Presbyterian Church. Shaw obtained an apprenticeship in the office of Jenny and Mundy, an outstanding training ground which had produced architects including Daniel Burnham and Louis Sullivan. The office was located in the Home Insurance Building, William LeBaron Jenney's most important building, and widely regarded as the first true skyscraper. Howard Van Doren Shaw and Frances Wells were married on April 20th, 1893. She was the daughter of Moses Wells, a wholesale boot and shoe merchant. It was a happy union. They shared their love of travel and poetry and encouraged each other's creativity. The union produced 3 daughters, Evelyn and Sylvia, within the first 4 years of their marriage, and then 15 years later, their 3rd daughter, Frances Theodora. Shaw built a dollhouse for his daughters, and this is still in the family. This picture I just received a couple days ago. And I thought it was interesting because I looked at the first floor fireplaces, and they reminded me a bit of the fireplace on the right, which is actually one that Shaw designed for the House of the Four Winds in Lake Forest. In early 1894, Shaw established his own practice, setting up his office on the top floor of his parents' home on Calumet Avenue. He hired a draftsman named Robert Work and quickly established a reputation as a residential architect. In 1897, he received his first commercial commission through his Yale classmate Thomas E. Donnelly. The building, located at 731 South Plymouth Court in Printers Row, housed the Lakeside Press, later R.R. Donnelly and Sons. The vaulted fireproof structure with reinforced concrete floors demonstrated Shaw's ability to design a building that was both beautiful and highly functional. Shaw conceived the Indian head ornament over the west entrance on Plymouth Court. It was created by the artist Joseph C. Leyendecker, the artist who gave us the quintessential Arrow shirt man and many Saturday Evening Post covers. And within a few years, it was officially adopted by the company as their printer's mark and trademark. Shaw had a long history with Second Presbyterian Church, where his parents started attending in the 1860s. He was baptized and confirmed here. He also served for many years as a trustee. So it was not surprising that he would be hired by the congregation for their building projects. The first of those projects was in 1897, when he designed this charming building to serve as the Crear Sunday School Chapel. It was located in the 5800 block of South Indiana Avenue and still stands today. It's interesting to note that the chapel was built the same year as his country house, Ragdale, about which we will hear more later. Both featured twin gables on the facade and a stucco finish. It's also interesting to note the seemingly impossible chimney hovering over the large window on the left. Other details on the building include the entryway here with its half timbering and brick in a herringbone pattern, both of which show up again and again in his designs. In March of 1900, a devastating fire destroyed much of the sanctuary in which we are sitting, but left the outer walls intact. Shaw was engaged to rebuild the interior, and soon after, he and his wife went off on their first European trip together, where he studied churches and other buildings in England for inspiration. He returned in the fall, presented the plans which were adopted, and work began. He engaged a number of Chicago craftsmen with whom he had worked previously to execute his vision. These included the artist Frederick Clay Bartlett, lighting designer Willie H. Lau, and the leaded glass firm of Giannini and Hilgard. Shaw incorporated motifs to create a unified appearance throughout the space, including the pomegranate, the grapevine, and the angel, the latter of which are 175 in the sanctuary. You're welcome to look for those during the break. The result, which was completed late in 1901, is a Gesamtkunstwerk, or total work of art, an essential tenet of the arts and crafts movement. The church was designated a National Historic Landmark in 2013, the only individually listed church in Chicago to be so designated, and the designation was entirely because of Shaw's brilliant interior. And I wish to acknowledge Susan Burian, who will be our panel moderator. She is the one who wrote the successful designation for our landmark status. The same year Shaw finished up the church, he received a commission from his father-in-law for an office and warehouse building located in the 1200 block of South Wabash Avenue, known as the Iger Building. The facade is very interesting. You'll notice the groupings of floor-to-ceiling windows set between brick piers, which clearly express the structural frame. It's an important example of the Chicago School and shows Shaw's ability to embrace modernism in his commercial buildings. The next year, he designed the Henneberry Press Building, 1 block to the north on Wabash. The 8-story structure also featured huge expanses of glass and displays a clearly articulated base, middle, and top. And you'll notice how the shallow pediments at the base and the cornice emphasize the verticality and create a sense of lightness to the overall design. Shaw did 3 houses in the neighborhood, among the last that were built before the area went into decline. In 1899, he completed this design for Charles Starkweather in the 1900 block of Calumet. It's a classic Georgian design, but with interesting features, including alternating dormers and a Palladian window, which is cut into the pediment over the main entrance. In 1903, he designed this house for John B. Drake Jr., just a few doors north of the Shaw family home on Calumet. It was designed in the Tudor style with a pleasing asymmetrical brick facade, anchored by a central recessed entryway and a wraparound porch. The second house he designed that year was more controversial. Built for his Yale classmate Ralph Martin Shaw, no relation, in the 2600 block of Prairie Avenue, the narrow brick row house was stylistically different from its neighbors, but more importantly, addressed the need for housing an automobile. The ground floor was centered by the entrance to the motor room, as it was known, that featured a large turntable set into the floor so that the auto could be turned around when it was time to exit. The ground level was visually cut off from the rest of the house by the projecting limestone lintel above which was set a large grouping of 3 windows, denoting the main living spaces on the second level. Although praised by architects, Shaw's handwritten note to a photo of the house in his scrapbook read, quote, "Very avant-garde and criticized." Shaw's later commissions in the neighborhood reflect its rapid transformation from residential to commercial in the first decades of the 20th century. In 1907, he designed a printing plant for the publishers Ginn and Company on the 2300 block of Prairie Avenue. Built of reinforced concrete in the classical revival style, the most notable feature was a series of 3-story brick columns which lent a grand effect to the facade. The building was the center of 2 preservation battles at the turn of the 21st century. The reconstructed facade survives nearby in the 2200 block of King Drive. In 1911, Shaw received another commission from the Donnelly Company, which had outgrown its Lakeside Press building he did earlier. That year, the company acquired all of the lots on the east side of the 2100 block of Calumet, directly across the street from the house in which Shaw's widowed mother was still living. Considered one of the finest examples of industrial Gothic, the building's design reflects Shaw's directive to design the structure, quote, "so that it will not be beautiful only today, but 100 years from now. We want to build it so people will say that it is art, intelligence, and beauty, rather than a flashy display of money." The brick and limestone piers are clearly articulated as buttresses, with recessed spandrels and large expanses of glass in between. It was built in 4 stages over a period of 17 years, completed after Shaw's death, but true to his original designs. Ornament included rich stone carving and a series of terracotta plaques inspired by historic printers' marks, and other items, including the date of construction, is shown on the left. The plaque on the right, which initially indicates the phrase "in hoc signo," or "by this sign," it's an ecclesiastical phrase used often in the early days of printing, but you'll notice that the 2 letters displayed are HS, which also denotes Howard Shaw as the architect. It was designated a Chicago landmark in 2004. The decline in the neighborhood resulted in Michigan Avenue's rapid transformation into what was known as Motor Row. Eventually, more than 100 automobile showrooms were built on the blocks north and south of the church. This illustration shows the transformation of the street and is the work of the well-known Chicago Tribune cartoonist John T. McCutcheon, who was the husband of Shaw's daughter, Evelyn. Shaw's contribution to Motor Row was the showroom for the Nyberg Automobile Works in the 2400 block of Michigan Avenue. Completed in 1912, the building featured huge plate glass windows at ground level to showcase the automobiles, with divided light casement windows and finely detailed ornament above, giving a feeling of lightness to the design. Although Shaw never designed another building in the neighborhood, he remained active throughout the Chicago area and beyond, designing everything from houses to industrial buildings, and from the planned company town of Marktown in East Chicago, Indiana, to the first modern shopping mall, Market Square in Lake Forest. We will hear about both of those projects later this morning. Shortly after returning from the Bahamas, where he visited his daughter and son-in-law and supervised construction of the Custom House Watchtower in Nassau, Shaw was admitted to a hospital in Baltimore for treatment of pernicious anemia. Although easily treated today, it proved fatal, and he died on May 6, 1926, one day before his 57th birthday. He was interred at Graceland Cemetery, with a short service attended only by his family, per his request. He had designed the distinctive marker years earlier for his parents, the tapered pedestal supporting a copper orb containing the words of the 23rd Psalm. The day before Shaw died, he received word that he had been awarded the gold medal by the American Institute of Architects, the highest honor awarded by that organization. It was only the 5th time the medal had been awarded to an American architect. The announcement noted that Shaw was regarded as, quote, one of the finest artists in the profession, whose work is notable for its simplicity and distinctive American character, freely interpreting traditional forms rather than following them slavishly. His widow attended the AIA convention the next year to receive his medal. During the presentation, it was noted that, quote, his buildings command the interest and admiration of his fellow architects as well as the laymen and carry a message. And we'll hear more about that from Stuart Cohn in just a few minutes. Frances Shaw wrote a loving tribute to her husband soon after his death, and copies are available today thanks to Paul Myers. She closed her tribute with these words. It was said about William Morris, you cannot lose a man like that by his own death, only by your own. I know his family feels this to be true of Howard Shaw. Shaw and his wife were both great lovers of poetry and early supporters of Poetry magazine. So it is appropriate to close with an excerpt from a poem by Agnes Lee, published in Poetry magazine a few months after his death. For he made wood to feel and stone to dream. Out of the rock, lightly as blooms a flower, his sensitive hand evoked the spell. Thank you.